Welcome everyone. My name is Lynette Roth and I am the Daimler Curator of the Busch-Reisinger Museum and head of the Division of Modern and Contemporary Art at the Harvard Art Museums. And I'm going to be serving as a moderator for the Q&A a bit later on. Before we begin today's program, the Harvard Art Museums acknowledge that Harvard University is situated on the traditional and ancestral territory of the Massachusetts people, and we at the university strive to honor this relationship. I want to thank you all for joining us for this week's session of our series Art Talks Live, which I know many of you know. We have many return visitors to this program, participants. We offer with these talks an opportunity to take an up-close look at works from our collections with the staff of the Harvard Art Museums. And you can join us on Zoom every other Thursday afternoon at 2 p.m. for these short interactive talks. And in them, we investigate artist materials and techniques, reveal our latest discoveries, offer a fresh look at old favorites, and explore big ideas using the collections of the Harvard Art Museums. So just a few logistics before we begin. We are using the webinar format, so please submit your questions in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. The presentation will last approximately 15 minutes, and we will dedicate the last 15 minutes of our time today to the Q&A. You can go ahead and put your questions in the Q&A box during the presentation, but we're going to get to them at the end. And we will conclude this talk at 2:30 p.m. So now I'm very pleased to introduce our speakers today. Both hail from the museum's incredible collections management team, and I'm thrilled to have them here on Art Talks Live. In his role as Assistant Director for Exhibitions, Elie Glyn oversees the design of all permanent collections and exhibition galleries and directs the museum's team of installers and art handlers. And over the course of his career, Elie has planned dozens of exhibitions with subjects ranging from antiquities to contemporary art, and he specializes in display furniture. He creates settings for art that balance conservation and safety requirements with visual considerations. And we're going to see that in today's talk. He is joined today by Sean Lunsford. Sean is one of the museum's 5 exhibition production specialists, a team we call the Exhibition Crew. And Sean, who has been at the Harvard Art Museums for 10 years, installs not just special exhibitions, but all of our permanent collection galleries and collections. And that's a job that requires incredible precision, but also a great deal of creative problem solving. For their talk today, entitled Setting the Fans Afloat, we are going to get a behind the scenes look from Elie and Sean at the research and planning for one aspect of the installation of our current exhibition, Painting Edo, Japanese art from the Feinberg Collection. So with that, I will turn it over to Elie and Sean.
Hello, everyone. Thanks, Lynette. My name is Elie Glyn, and I'm head of exhibition design for the Harvard Art Museums.
Hello, my name is Sean Lunsford, and I am an exhibition production specialist at the Harvard Art Museums.
Today, we're going to share with you the creative thought process that went into a unique presentation of Japanese fans in our current special exhibition, Painting Edo, Japanese art from the Feinberg Collection. This exhibition, along with our entire museum, unfortunately, but temporarily closed to the public in March of 2020. We remain hopeful that we will soon be able to reopen our doors and greet you all in the galleries once again. In the meantime, there is a wealth of material about this exhibition available online. More information about this and the links will come toward the end of this talk. In the brief time that this show was open, this fan wall generated a good amount of favorable attention from those who were able to see it. And here you see this display in its completed state, as if standing in front of it in the gallery.
And here you see a time-lapse video of me at work installing it. This special arrangement of framed fans is a good example of how museum colleagues from different backgrounds come together to generate a unique idea. and then figure out how to make it possible. In this case, it's a collaboration between our curator, Rachel Saunders, Elie, our designer, our conservation team, and then me and my fellow exhibition productions crew. Today, we're going to walk through this process with you, step by step, from concept to execution.
When making decisions about how to display artworks in a museum, there's often a traditional approach depending on the type of object that it is. Usually this approach is derived in some way from the original manner in which one was intended to see this type of object. Not only does this help visitors to understand what they're looking at, but it's often the most sympathetic approach aesthetically. It is for this reason that, in the Painting Edo exhibition, we have presented most of the hanging scrolls from the Feinberg Collection in these shallow wall cases, like you see here on the right, that resemble a traditional Japanese interior display alcove. This is the type of setting where such paintings were meant to be seen.
However, sometimes the artwork we're dealing with doesn't exactly lend itself to this traditional type of display. The object might be something that was once considered functional or ephemeral, the type of thing you would originally have held in your hand. That is, something that was never intended to be presented in a gallery. These type of objects present art museums with a challenge and an opportunity to invent a new display method, one that makes sense both visually and conceptually.
The collection of Betsy and Bob Feinberg is particularly rich in painted fans, well beyond what is actually represented in the Painting Edo exhibition. In Japanese society during the Edo period, different types of handheld fans were commonly used for a wide variety of purposes. They were used, for example, in theatrical performances, displayed in courtly rituals and military pageants, and adorned celebrations such as weddings. This type of fan for personal use, the folding variety with wood or bamboo slats known as ogi, were prized for their beauty and as indicators of social status and cultivation.
In our exhibition, some of the fans are still mounted on ribs and can fold opened and closed in the way most people normally think of fans. These are displayed so they can be viewed in the round. Other fans have been mounted flat to hanging scrolls. We have examples of both of these two formats on view in this exhibition. But the 20 fans that make up the centerpiece of the gallery have all been mounted flat to mat board and framed. These fans were intended to be applied to panels of folding screens, as is illustrated in this example from the Smithsonian. In this format, they'd be preserved and appreciated more as works of art than as functional objects.
The 20 painted fans here consist of two series, both painted by Suzuki Kiitsu. The larger, more colorful series here of 8 fans depict seasonal flowers and plants such as magnolia, peony, and narcissus. The slightly smaller and more subdued series of 12 fans depict the flora and fauna of the 12 months, including violets and butterflies, carp and irises, and winter chrysanthemums. As you might expect, given the subject matter, there is a prescribed order for viewing both series, taking you from spring to winter. Our installation keeps them in sequence from right to left, which is the typical direction for reading Japanese art and text.
So, where did the idea for this unique arrangement come from? Well, it was part inspiration and part necessity. First of all, some context. Here is this same location in our university study gallery as it normally looks. We have a wall of glass cases, which normally house a variety of objects from our collection. This gallery is situated at one end of our exhibition gallery suite. So for many visitors, it'll be the last gallery they encounter when visiting Painting Edo. Our curator, Rachel, had the idea to use this space for an extensive and celebratory presentation devoted to a singular format of Japanese painting, fans.
The inspiration for the design of this layout was also suggested by our curator, Rachel. who brought forward the idea of ogi nagashi, or scattered fans. This refers to an artistic trope in Japanese painting, which may or may not have been in actual practice. The idea is that at the end of the summer season, people would gather along a bridge and toss their fans over the railing. As represented in Japanese art, the discarded fans would flutter downward toward the river below in a sort of graceful, short-lived cloud. So in essence, our conceptual approach with this arrangement was to suggest a fleeting moment of beautiful chaos, frozen here in time. It seemed like an appropriate idea for painted fans, which are themselves a kind of ephemeral format of painting, but which have often been preserved for long-term viewing and appreciation. So now, how did we go about bringing this idea to life?
First of all, we needed to convert the existing glass cases in the study gallery into a usable wall surface. We did so by covering the 5 central cases with these large dark blue panels. Next, we needed to prepare the matted fans for display. With the permission of Bob and Betsy Feinberg, our colleagues Charlotte Carney and Adam Baker in the Paper Conservation Lab prepared all new housings for these 20 fans. They now all have matching maple frames and silk line overmats with windows that had to be hand cut with great precision by Charlotte. Meanwhile, I worked on the inside liner of the frames as Charlotte matted and framed the fans. When considering the layout parameters, I decided on using a cleat system for hanging the frames. A cleat is basically a strip of wood that runs along the back of the frame with its edge cut at a 45-degree angle. Another cleat is attached to the wall, upside down and reversed. The 2 cleats then slide onto each other, securing the frame to the wall. This provides a stable installation method as well as ensuring that the framed fans sit nice and flat to the wall. Working with Charlotte, I then connected the cleats to the wooden strainers on all of the new maple frames.
It was important to the overall concept that the final layout of the frames appear to be haphazard. One way in particular that we sought to achieve this effect was to have the frames overlap one another. For this to work, the frames needed to be situated on different vertical planes, spacing them off the wall to varying depths. Ultimately, this is really a 3-dimensional arrangement. After all, you wouldn't expect 20 fans that had just been tossed off a bridge to remain in a flat 2-dimensional formation as they're falling.
So, let me peel back the curtain and show you how we performed this magic trick. To achieve the floating effect, we built a series of spacer boxes to go in between the frames and the wall. Their depths and measurements were figured out beforehand, and I made them interchangeable, so if there needed to be any changes, it would be possible. Part of my job is to anticipate last-minute adjustments in the gallery during installation, and the system we came up with allows for that. The spacer boxes are all shorter and narrower than the frames. So when you're looking at this installation, the mounting system disappears, giving the illusion of framed fans floating in space.
However, it was important to have the overall layout mostly figured out ahead of time. We knew that while we could make final adjustments during the installation, we couldn't just enter the gallery without any kind of plan. So using our largest room in our art study center, and by pushing together several tables in a row, we set up a mock-up of the entire wall using the actual matted fans. And here you see them before they received their new silk-lined overmats. Based on this mock-up, I then prepared a detailed elevation drawing of the fan wall as a guide to Sean and his fellow installers in the gallery.
Despite having the layout mostly figured out ahead of time, we knew we would still want to make final adjustments in the gallery. In this case, it would have been impractical to use the actual frame fans for this. Not enough art handlers, not enough hands. So I made life-size replicas using color printouts mounted to cardboard, which could then be pinned to the wall. We even used thick cardboard to simulate the actual depth of the wood frames. And this brings us back to the time-lapse footage with which we began this talk.
This unconventional layout also forced us to be creative with the artwork labels as well. Normally, one expects to find the label right alongside the artwork, but of course, this would have disrupted the overall appearance and spoiled the floating illusion. Thankfully, our graphic designers, Zach Jensen and Becky Hunt, devised an approach where the labels could be off on a separate wall. Little thumbnail images help visitors to link the actual fans with their titles. In this case, the titles are mostly descriptions of the images that are painted on them.
Then once we were finished with this floating fan wall and the rest of the Painting Edo exhibition, we opened our doors for the world to come see it for at least a few weeks, as it happens.
We'd like to acknowledge the larger team who brought this exhibition to life, most of whom you see pictured here. The wall of floating fans that we've been talking about is definitely a highlight, but far from the only one in this sweeping special presentation of Japanese paintings. And all of it made possible, of course, by the generosity of Betsy and Bob Feinberg in sharing their incredible collection with us.
And finally, be sure to check out our wealth of related online content. The main webpage on harvardartmuseums.org will give you a good introduction to this exhibition and the depth and richness of these display. From there, you can follow links to other platforms. There's a detailed 4-part online presentation on Google Arts and Culture. We have a series of videos, including the time-lapse video that is in this presentation on our Vimeo channel. And you can find more virtual events such as this one.
And if you, like me, have already had enough screen time to last you a lifetime, then you're in luck because there's not one, but 2 books available to purchase. One that accompanies the special exhibition and the other a full catalog of the Feinberg Collection. Again, you can find the link from the exhibition webpage. There's just so much good stuff available. You all should basically cancel your plans for the rest of the afternoon and go check it out. Well, anyway, thank you for joining us, and we're looking forward to your questions.
Great, thank you so much, Elie and Sean. We've already had quite enthusiastic responses in the chat, including from one participant who did get a chance to see the show and mentioned that the fan display in particular caught his eye, so much so that he asked one of the folks in the gallery about it and referred to it as brilliant. So we're hoping there are also many questions about whether the exhibition will be open when we reopen the museums, and to that we've responded in the chat, but I just want to say please stay tuned. The museum remains closed, but the exhibition, its original run has been extended, so we're hoping as soon as we are able to reopen the museums that we will reopen Painting Edo for you to see. And with that, I'd like to say, first of all, this is such a wonderful example, Elie and Sean, also hearing the 2 of you present together of the collaborative nature of museum work. And that if you want to go back, that incredible slide, Elie, of everyone that was involved in the Painting Edo installation, the idea also of the Ogi Nagaski, this idea of the fans themselves kind of fanning out and the kind of uncontrolled chaos of that. I mean, for me, that speaks to the museum work, the constant challenges that we're faced with as a team. So thank you very much. Let me see here. There was a question about what happens to the fans after the exhibition is over. So you described that many are matted in order to preserve them. Will you take them out of their frames and store them in another manner?
Well, they are still part of the collection of Bob and Betsy Feinberg and will be returned to them after the show, is my understanding. I believe they intend to keep them in their new frames and silk-lined mats.
Yeah, it's a good way to protect them, is keep them in the frames.
Right, we often do that as well as when something also has a custom frame, often it is retained and stored that way. Of course, that presents also storage issues for the museum if everything were to be framed up and remain that way. Lots of comments about what a fabulous installation and a beautiful exhibition. There was a question about the wood slats that you talked about, Sean. I believe your system, your hanging system.
The Cleat System.
Were they special, and were they separately on display?
Their wood cleats are actually something that are used in a lot of installation techniques, not just with artwork, but other things as well. They're handmade. I handmade all of them because the liner that is in all of these frames is a certain thickness. So I had to trim everything down to make sure it matched that. But you can't see them. So that's another aspect of it, is there's a little ability to adjust the pieces on the wall on a when they're on a cleat system. But yeah, it's a very versatile and very solid system. But another reason why, since the frames are in part in certain areas overlapping, if you were to use something, let's say like a D-ring or a wire and a hook on the wall, the painting, where the wire and the hooks are, it comes off the wall a little bit, and the piece is at a slight angle. So if you actually have another piece, it's overlapping another frame, it's going to be obvious and really distracting. And you'd have to have it come off even more because it's angling down into the other piece. So having the cleat system allows it to be just parallel to the wall. So that way another thing can slide behind it, another frame can slide behind it without having to worry about the frames touching and being able to maintain, secure.
And as Sean well knows, actually pitching forward is one of my personal pet peeves. So the Cleat system is an incredible solution to that. And obviously in this specific instance really gave you that variation so beautifully.
And the other thing about it also is if anything had to be changed, you could swap out. If you decided to put another piece somewhere else, everything had the same system. So you could change your mind in the gallery if you had to.
Did Rachel make a lot of changes?
No.
One other benefit of the cleats, just to mention, is that it allows the frames to sit perfectly flush. For those few frames that did go directly against the wall, there's no, like you can see in this picture here, the frame on the bottom in the right image, that there's no gap between the frame and the wall. Now, if you have an older wall which might not have a perfectly flat surface, that's actually not a desirable thing. You would want to have a little bit of a gap to hide that fact. But in this case, since they were brand new panels, we knew that they would be perfectly flat.
There's a related question here looking at these images, and that's whether you had any challenges lighting the fan wall.
That's an interesting question, because I also do a lot of lighting design for the galleries as well. The lighting wasn't what it had. I wanted to put basically a nice even light over everything. These are light sensitive objects, so they have to be maintained at a certain foot candle in order to protect them. But the dark wall really kind of helps with that, because the light frames and the light mats actually really kind of push forward off that wall and really kind of help illuminate the fans themselves within their frame. So it wasn't, it wasn't that difficult to evenly light them. We have enough lighting track to do that. But the dark wall definitely helps when you have a lower foot candle or you have to dim the lights down quite a bit. It helps a lot.
Mm-hmm. There are also some questions about how long this process takes. And so both the exhibition planning process itself, but also specifically working out this design and installation process.
I was involved with the design of this exhibition for a little over 2 years, which is fairly typical for a project of this size. There was quite a bit of planning that happened on the organizational side prior to my getting involved. I'll let Sean speak to how long it took to actually install the wall.
Yeah, well, so once the Elie had his layout for everything and the depths they wanted and everything else, it took a little back and forth with just making prototypes and then having Rachel come in with Elie and kind of see them coming off the wall and if that's, you know, if that worked for them. And then it was just construction mode. It's, you know, you start just making everything. But once you do a lot of planning ahead of time, you like I said before, you kind of plan for any adjustments that need to be made, anything like that. So it doesn't slow you down once you get into the installation process. So you need to make a change. It doesn't come up the works. You can swap things out. I made actually even extra of the wall spacer boxes. So if they wanted other pieces to come off the wall, we had that option as well. So the time-lapse video makes it look like I did this very fast, but it took a day. It took a day, but a lot of the plan, well, it took a little more than a day because we set up the mock-ups first. So if you wanted to kind of move things around, that could happen. And then you can step away from the installation of the mock-ups, look at other parts of the gallery, then come back to it with fresh eyes, and then see if there's any other thing you want to change. And then once it's ready to go, it's ready to go. And even as you're installing it, if you know, because this also happens sometimes to where the actual object starts being installed, and then there's some aspect of it that you didn't really necessarily notice until it got into that space. And then you see there's a little adjustment you do want to make, but again, we're prepared for that. So, but in this case, there was a little adjusting left to right, but the cleat system I created allotted for that. So it wasn't an issue at all.
And you also mentioned, Sean, which I think is really important, that you also, in making the cardboard replicas and the mock-ups, that's a technique that you use very often with the exhibition crew and can be really helpful also if the loans are coming from somewhere else.
Absolutely.
That we can stand there together and sort of picture what things are going to look like in advance. And sometimes they look so good.
They scare people.
Hard to tell the difference.
And also with, especially with larger objects, like in some big sculpture, we'll actually make something that fills that space. So you kind of get some idea of what it will look like before, you know, we actually get all the rigging, take the doors off the museum and bring something huge into the museum or something like that. It helps a lot.
We had a couple of questions related to the Ogi Nagashi and whether you had considered the idea of actually having the fans be tilted in the way that they are in the works that you showed as they were tossed.
So there was definitely a balance that we attempted to strike. There are certain expectations that people have when they enter a gallery, that the works be presented right side up, for example. There's an obvious reason for that. It's the most sympathetic to the object. It's the orientation which the artist intended you to view the painting. Operating within those kind of limitations, how can you push it in the direction toward the Ogi Nagashi as much as possible? And it is subtle. Exhibition designers, much of what we do is subtle. Most people probably won't make a connection to this practice, you know, to the extent that they are aware that it exists, and it'll just be a lively and interesting presentation.
I see here there's a note from Bob Feinberg saying they would be more than happy to have the fans returned in their new frames. There are so many questions. I think if you both have time, we can take just one or two more because there's an important question which I think would be helpful, and that is how this fits into your exhibition design of the rest of the Feinberg exhibition. So how do you see this fitting in, and were there any other ideas you had that couldn't be realized?
This presentation of fans really does kind of stand somewhat alone. There's no parallel for this type of presentation anywhere else in the exhibit. In fact, as I mentioned with the hanging scrolls toward the beginning of the talk, elsewhere our approach was to try to recreate to a certain degree the original conditions in which one was intended to interact with these paintings. So that's very different than our approach here with the fans, which are capturing a one-time moment. So really the only thing it has in common with the rest of the exhibition is that this dark blue wall color appears a couple of other times.
Right, that was one of the questions of the choice of the background wall color.
Well, like Sean said, it does help them pop, even though they're at low light levels. It's all about perceived contrast. You know, it may have also been kind of a subliminal cue to the fact that they're heading down to a river. But I think mostly it was just for visual contrast and to have it pack a punch.
And indeed it does. And I see we also have a note from our curator, Rachel Saunders, who says there was very little curatorial interference on the day because the planning was so wonderful. So that's what we like to hear. I would love to end, actually, we had several questions specifically for Sean about how he got into this kind of work and if he sort of set out to work in a museum and just a little bit more about your background, Sean. A lot of curiosity here in the chat.
Yeah, so I went to art school and I graduated. I studied both painting and video art. So when I got out, I started working in the television industry. When I moved to Boston, I worked in the post-production edit suite of PBS's Frontline and started working with a lot of equipment there. Then started working in, I moved on from there to work as an assistant video engineer. But then I kind of got really tired of the television industry and wanted to get back into working with art again. And I had a painting studio and worked in painting. So while I was working in television, I also, volunteered in galleries to help install. And then from there, I kind of got into the art packing, art handling private industry here in Boston. There was a company called Fine Arts Enterprises that I started working for. And by doing that, I worked with a lot of collectors all over the East, all over New England, the East Coast. But also all of the museums, the Gardner, like ICA, MFA, the FOG, Harvard Art Museums, and learned how to, work with a lot of different objects, installing them, packing them. And then when there was a position open at Harvard, I applied for it. I love working with artwork. I love the problem solving aspect of, especially like, something like this. Our team, we love, when someone brings us a very challenging situation. It's like, how are you going to do this? And we're like, we'll figure it out. We know how to do it. And you learn a lot. And I'd like to thank all the colleagues also. I learned a ton from the conservation lab and from the curators. I think our team at the museum is very kind of interwoven, which is really dynamic and a wonderful place to work. But they're definitely weird stepping stones, because there's not a whole lot of places to where it's like, oh, I want to become an art handler, or I want to become a museum installer, where do I go to learn that? And, you know, it's one of those weird catch-22 things where it's like, well, the only way you can get into it is if you have experience doing it. Well, and the only way you can get experience doing it is by doing it. So that, you know, it's a weird path, so to speak. But there's a lot of change going on right now with some, you know, apprenticeships and internships, especially on the West Coast, with things happening to where they're trying to draw more people in to this kind of work, and especially making it more diverse. Diversity is a big issue. And I believe that, you know, our museum's also following in that path, trying to make it more diverse. But it is a very roundabout way to get in to this kind of work. But it's challenging, but wonderfully challenging, I would say. I would recommend.
Well, that's great. There was a question about advice to how to get into exhibition design and that kind of work. So I know that many of our collections management team have started out in different positions within visitor services, security, collections management, and often moved, you know, within the museum to different positions. So definitely worth exploring and thinking about if you're interested in museums. And one of the things that is so great about the museum is it offers so many different kinds of opportunities for people with so many different skills. So I certainly don't know what I would do without our exhibition design and installation team. And with that, I want to thank Elie and Sean so much for sharing this behind the scenes look with us today. And thank all of you for your many excellent questions, and invite you to join us this same time, same place on Zoom next Thursday, January 28th, for our next Art Talk Live. We're going to hear then from Joachim Hohmann, our Maida and George Abrams curator of drawings. And he's going to be speaking about a 1918 Picasso drawing of the Commedia dell'arte figure Pierrot. And I just want to give you a heads up for our many return participants. After Joachim's talk next week, we are going to be changing the date of our art talks, and they're going to be taking place on Tuesdays at 12:30. So I hope that's a time that works well for all of you. Of course, as Elie and Sean pointed out, please visit our online calendar and Harvard Art Museums at Home for more about these and other programs, and also to really, if you want to delve into painting Edo, get the catalog, take in that online content. There's a really just a wealth of information on our website about the exhibition, and we hope to see you all in the exhibition as soon as the Harvard Art Museums are able to reopen to the public. So thank you all again, and please fill out our survey when it hits your inbox. Thank you, and see you all next time.